So if you haven't yet watched the previous video, please watch it. I will leave it right there. Watch it before you watch. We had said that to understand the speaker, you need to know about the magnets and the magnetic fields, and then also know about conductors carrying a current, and then you need to know about the force exerted by a magnetic field on a conductor that is carrying current, and that will result into a motion. Now, you need to know also what sound is, and sound is simply compressions and rarefactions of air. That's how I've decided to simplify it. And then the fifth thing is to know how this motion is converted into sound. Now, that's what we are getting at right now. So right now, we had so far drawn our magnets. We have two magnets. This is magnet 1. Let me give it a blue lining for differentiation. That's also magnet 2. So we've decided to place the north pole facing the south pole of magnet 2. Now, every time you have two magnets nearby, there will be a magnetic field around or in between them. So that's the direction of the magnetic field. That would be the direction in which free north pole would be forced to move toward. So that's representing our field. Now, this is a magnet. Actually, let me try to draw it in 3D. But of course, that was the cross section. Okay, like that. That's how it would have looked like. So there's a field in between these two magnets, magnet 1 and magnet 2. Now, with that, if there was a conductor, in our case a wire, a conductor is just a metal because it allows flow of electrons, anything that allows free flow of electrons. So I have cut it off from that side and that side. So this is a conductor, it's in this magnetic field. So assuming we had a voltage applied across the terminals of this wire, and therefore current flowed out of it and into it in that direction right there, and out from that side. That's current, right? So if this conductor were in this field and then we put a voltage across and current flowed through it in that direction, this conductor would experience a force on it, so it would be pushed upward. So you may be asking me, how does that happen? So here, if you remember some bit of O-level physics, you will notice that you would apply the Fleming's left-hand rule to help know which direction this conductor would be pushed. So this is a magnetic field in between these two magnets. There's a conductor in between. Then you run a current through it. It will be forced to move upwards out of the field, and use Fleming's left-hand rule. In other words, this shows the direction of, these are basically two axes. This is at right angle to this. This finger, I'm looking at the thumb, first finger, and then the next one. So this is at right angle to that, and that is at right angle to this. So this thumb points in the direction of the magnetic field. That's from the north to the south pole, and then this second finger points in the direction of the current, and the current is going out like that, and therefore the force will be upwards like that. So this conductor would be forced upwards. Now, if we change the direction of current, and current decided to flow in that direction, yeah, you know, current flows from positive to negative. This other one was flowing from positive also to negative. So if current were to flow in that direction, enter this conductor from this direction and come out from that direction, this conductor would experience a downward force. I feel like drawing the conductor right there, but yes, it would experience a downward force. So this is the principle the speaker uses to operate. In other words, you have a permanent magnetic field created by two permanent magnets, and then those two permanent magnets, there is a conductor in between them. So every time you supply current through this conductor, depending on the direction in which you've supplied the current, the conductor will move, and that's governed by Fleming's left-hand rule. So I know this is material of Little Science, the channel, but you'll bear with me that I had to bring it right here. So simply, for this channel, you need to know that whenever there is a conductor in a permanent magnetic field and you drive a current through it, it experiences a force, and the force is in the direction that depends on the direction of the current, and that direction you can figure it using Fleming's left-hand rule. So that's basically what you need to know. So for the speaker, the next question is, basically this is force, by the way, if you didn't know, force, and of course if there's a force, therefore the motion would be in that direction. Yeah. Now if the current were to flow in that direction through this conductor, the force would be downward, and that would produce definitely a downward motion. So what did I say? We have a permanent magnetic field with a conductor in that field, and whenever we drive a current through the conductor will experience a force, and that force depends on the direction of the current. So since sound is a set or successive series of compressions and rarefactions, that would mean that this current, for it to keep changing direction, is supplied as an alternating current. An alternating current always changes or reverses polarity. So at one point it's moving forward in the positive side, and at one point it's in the negative side of, but this is not for you. For you, all you need to know is that every time you have a conductor in a permanent magnetic field and then you pass a current through it, the conductor will experience a force. So how do we harness that force to help us produce sound? So now let's go back to our demo illustration right here. So from our diagram that we drew earlier on, if you note right here, we have ourselves, this is a magnet, yeah, and these are pole cores. So I am going to highlight these and make them blue, so that you see the fundamental things that help us convert force on a conductor within a magnetic field whenever a current is passed through it. So we have that like that, and then we have this there and this right there. I think I forgot to label this, but this is basically a pole piece but made out of iron, so I would say soft iron core. Okay, so now when you look at these beads, those beads are like a cut section of the voice coils. Now the voice coils are mounted onto this shaft. So how do we convert the motion on a conductor in a magnetic field into sound? So we have a conductor in a magnetic field, current is driven through it, the conductor experiences a force depending on the direction of the current. either upward or downwards. So we can actually cause this conductor to keep vibrating up and down by simply changing the direction of the current from this to that repeatedly. And that's the motion that we want to capture and convert to sound. So that we have done that. When you look at these coils, I know I've overly exaggerated, but when you look carefully, right here there will be a pole. Let's say a north pole, and then there a south pole. I know. Okay, let me try to zoom in. So there's a north pole right there, and there's a south pole right there. Therefore, in between here and there is a magnetic field. But now this bit that you're seeing, that is a conductor, and that experiences a force every time we put in current here. Oh, sorry, I got out of frame. Current here. So whenever we feed in current here, that current flows through that coil, that wire or that lead into the coil, right? Into that lead, into the coil. This rotates around, comes like that, like that, like that. I'm drawing it faintly because that shouldn't appear in the cross section, and then comes back, okay, like that, into the second lead. Now when we drive that current through these coils, remember these coils are in a magnetic field, even that is south and north. Then, so we have a north pole here, south pole there, the north pole here, south pole there, and therefore in between there's a magnetic field, but in between that magnetic field there's a conductor wound in form of a coil, and that conductor, when we drive a current through it, experiences a force. Now this will move up and down, up and down, depending on the direction of the current that is flowing. So since sound is delivered as an alternating current, this vibrates to and fro. Now when these coils try to move to and fro, they are restrained onto that shaft, and then that shaft has the diaphragm right there mounted onto it. So when that shaft moves up and down, as a result of the coils moving up and down, it causes the diaphragm to move up and down, and then you get your sound waves. Okay, let's just take off this to give you an example of what's happening. So look at this critically right there. So we said earlier on, to understand how a loudspeaker works, you need to understand magnets and magnetic fields. We'll dive into details of that. And then conductors carrying a current, and then the force exerted by that field on a current carrying conductor, and therefore resulting into motion. But you need to know what sound is. So sound being compressions and rarefactions of airwaves, that's what we want to get. So how do we convert that motion that is caused by a magnetic field on a current carrying conductor? How do we convert that motion into sound? Okay, and so we said that when you have a permanent magnetic field in between two permanent poles of a permanent magnet, magnet 1 and 2, then you have a conductor in between them. When you drive a current through this conductor, it experiences a force governed by Fleming's left-hand rule. that force will cause the conductor to move if the force is strong enough, and therefore that force's direction depends on the direction of the current. So if we reverse, the force will be downwards. Now we can cause this conductor to keep vibrating up and down by simply reversing the direction of the current many times, and that's by feeding alternating current through this. And that's what brings us to the speaker. So that's what we want to demonstrate right here. Now if you look at this, like we defined earlier on, now what you're seeing right here, we are looking at this from that direction, in other words, in that direction. So let me tilt it like this. Now when you look at this right here, this pole piece right there, it comes up to here, so this generates one pole. And then when you look at this other piece right there, it's this other surrounding ring, so it leaves us a gap in between right there. Now that gap in between right there has a magnetic field in between, because this is one pole of the magnet, that's another pole of the magnet, and in between there is a magnetic field. Now if there's a magnetic field, we need to place a conductor in that magnetic field. So if you look carefully right there, you will notice this is a coil of wires. I don't know whether it's wide enough for you to see the strands. Okay, it's not that well focused, but these are windings of wires. So if you look carefully, this wire comes from here, goes right in there, then comes to this that you're seeing right there, and then starts winding around, and then goes back down into there, and then comes out through the second terminal right there. And that is a wire wound many times. This is to increase the total force that can be picked out from these wires. Now when you look at that wire that is wound, it's wound onto this cylinder, so it's glued onto that cylinder right there that you see right there. It's glued, so that if this coil, when the current is passed through, when this coil, when a current is passed through these leads, when you apply a voltage here, it moves with that shaft, the cylinder that you're seeing. Now when that cylinder moves, it therefore will move this cone that is anchored onto it. So motion from this coil is transmitted through that cylinder right onto the shaft, and then the shaft will move outward or inward, depending on the direction of the force on it. And that is a loudspeaker basically, or at the very least of it. So you might be wondering, why do we have the other parts? Now just like we drew right here, if you look at that shaft, it doesn't touch the bottom. It's not supposed to touch the bottom. It should be suspended in a manner that these coils remain in between those poles of the magnet, north pole, south pole, in between there. And therefore that's where this suspension right there, that suspension comes in to keep that cylinder suspended in air, so that the coils are I suppose I should hold it like this to help you get a clue of what I'm describing right here. So that is the diaphragm, the cone, which is there. This right here is that shaft or that cylinder right there, and then this is a suspension, that zigzag thing you see right there. And these two are the leads right there for bringing current. And these dots that you see rounded there, those are the coils. So this wire comes, makes a coil, and comes back out of that. So this wire comes, makes a coil, and then comes back. That assembly of the cone or diaphragm glued onto that cylinder, and then with the coils around it, plug into that hole between the pole pieces of the magnet. So the diaphragm right there, glued onto that cylinder right there, comes down here with the coils glued onto that shaft to form one unit. The suspension is to make sure that coil is suspended in that gap right there without it touching the bottom. So in essence, this, every time current is sent to it, if current is sent into a certain direction, the positive direction, this shaft will move because the coil moved and push the diaphragm outwards. And then if the current is reversed, to pull it back inward. And so the speaker works by vibrating to and fro, compressing the air and rarefacting it, compressing the air, rarefacting it. And that's how rarefacting, it's just a hard word to use. I don't know whether that word is. So that's how your loudspeaker works. Basically, the force on a current conductor that is within a magnetic field causing motion, that motion being transferred to the diaphragm. The diaphragm compresses the air around it or retracts, causing you to hear sound. So that's the speaker. I do not know whether that was thorough enough, but I hope it is thorough because it's never the subject of this channel. But at Little Science, it shall be dealt with much better. Okay, now that we have mentioned that, I think let me go back to our speaker, because now we have used the big speaker to give us an explanation as to how the smaller speakers work. So let me find my smaller speakers and come. So that I had mentioned the suspension. Let me just break it down. I had told you about the primary components. So basically the primary components of this speaker is simply the magnet right there, and then the pole pieces to convert this magnet's poles to get concentrated at the top parts right there, north and south. And then we have the coils right there mounted on the cylindrical shaft, and then that cylindrical shaft is restrained onto a cone right there. In that, whenever you drive a current through the coil moves up and down because it's an alternating current. Whenever the current goes in one direction, it will go up. When it reverses, it comes down. So that's done so many times in a minute. So this keeps moving up and down. That movement of up and down by the coil is picked up by the cylindrical shaft and transmitted into the diaphragm. Then the diaphragm compresses the air or medium in front of it to allow you hear sound. The suspension is to keep the coil and its shaft suspended in air so that when it vibrates up and down, it never touches the bottom of the pole piece. And that you see right there, that dust cap, to prevent dust from entering into that gap in between there, because you want these coils moving and not touching either this side or that side of the pole pieces. Let me again repeat that. So the primary parts of the speaker are the magnet and the pole pieces to create the magnetic field right there. So the magnet and then the pole pieces, those two, to create the magnetic field in that gap. Now the second essential or primary component is the coil, those beads right there that are suspended in between the magnetic field created by the pole pieces, and that's our coil. Now that coil is mounted onto the shaft, and that's our shaft, the cylindrical shaft right there. The cylindrical shaft right there is mounted to the diaphragm. That's the diaphragm. It's mounted to the diaphragm by glue. Okay, that's the diaphragm or the cone. Okay, so why I call them the essential parts, and those are the significant parts necessary in converting current into sound. Now to convert current into sound, a current comes in, flows through the coil, but the coil is in a magnetic field, so the coil will experience an upward force, and then when the direction of current reverses, it will experience a downward force. Okay, so current flows through the coil. The coil is in the magnetic field in that hollow gap, so this coil will experience an up and down force. That up and down force will be picked up by the cylindrical shaft onto which the coil is mounted and glued to. Right there, that cylindrical shaft will now move the diaphragm up and down, up and down as the current keeps reversing direction. It does that many times in a second, and when the diaphragm moves up and down, it compresses the air in front of it, and rarefaction also happens, and that's what you hear as sound. Now those are the primary components, so could call this one a primary component, a P primary component, P primary component, P diaphragm primary component, K even this one, the leads and the current primary component. Now the secondary components are these other ones that help enhance efficiency, and that is the suspension right there. That's to keep this suspended so it doesn't touch down or flies out. And then we have the surround, which is that surround helps keep the cone from also flying out or dropping inward. And then the other thing is the frame. So the frame, I think the frame, which I'll consider it a secondary thing to support that entire assembly. Okay, secondary. And then there's this last one, the dust cap, that prevents dust from entering into that hole, and that's our dust cap right there. And now I know this video has been so long, but do subscribe. Thanks for watching. Phone lookout. We are going to bring you another video in which we tackle the wire, then another in which we tackle the pin and the different types of pins, and then another. So if you haven't yet watched the previous video, please watch it. I will leave it right there. Watch it before you watch that video. I'll leave it right there. I'll leave a card right there. Oh, sorry about the pen. I'll leave the card right there. Click on that card to watch the previous video.